everybody. This is Kristin with Airport Improvement, and I'm here today with Joe Agati with Agati Furniture. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us today. I'd like to find out a little bit for our viewers about what Agati Furniture is and what makes you stand apart.
Yeah, so Agati's a family-owned company. I am second generation. So my dad started the business about 30 plus years ago. And since the business has been started, we've been focused on designing innovative furniture for public spaces. So what we mean by that is we're always trying to find those kind of key user insights and innovate off that to try to make compelling product that fits.
Do you like it when an airport decides to use more color, or do you recommend a neutral color palette for most of them?
No, I think no. It kind of all depends on the space. I think each environment is its own kind of challenge, and I think the color kind of needs to work with the culture and the environment of the area. So, having a wild color arrangement, in an airport that's in the Pacific Northwest, may be a little odd compared to, having a very more timbered look to an airport in Miami would also be odd. So
right,
I think,
and it contributes to the sense of place, right?
exactly. Yeah, I think, the nice thing about airports is, most airports you go to, they're kind of a representation of either the city, town, or culture that they're in. And I think it's always fun to kind of see what, from the design side, because we don't really get into that side. That's really left more to the interior designers. I guess we'd be more on the functional side of it. It's always actually interesting to see when the project's done, because as we're going through the design phase, sometimes we know what fabric it's going to be, but we don't see it. It's just a name on a page. And then as it comes to the plan, you're like, oh, wow, that's really sharp coming through there. Like we may not even realize it until it's actually being produced. It's like, oh yeah, that's that fabric on there. Some of the longer term projects we'll do renderings and stuff to kind of help clients understand what's going on. But in the smaller ones, you don't even know until it's being produced.
Right. It's kind of fun to see it all revealed, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Now, you said that you're a second generation. This is a family business, and your dad brought you into the business. What is his background and your background? Is it in design, or how did you come about with this business?
Yeah, it's a good question. So my dad is his background is engineering, and he's got an MFA in glass sculpture. And then he worked with a wood sculptor when he was in college. And when he left, he decided he wanted to start a furniture company. So he moved to Chicago. Oh, wait, he was in Springfield for a little bit, then eventually moved to Chicago and started Agati Furniture. Then from there, I went to school for product design. I worked for a toy company just after college here in Chicago. They're Radio Flyer, so they're most known for wagons and trucks,
Right.
ride-ons, and now scooters and all sorts of things.
That's
So
fun.
I worked there for about 5 years. Great company, family owned, nice people, great culture. And then it kind of felt like time. It was, time to make a transition from Radio Flyer. And then at that time, Dad said it would maybe be a good time to join the family business. So I did.
What do you think people don't know about airport seating or public space seating that you think is more interesting?
Yeah. So I think, people, it's really maybe on the subconscious side that people don't realize like when it's really effective. In that, I think the philosophy for a long time is like, well, these airports are just kind of waiting grounds in the cattle car before you kind of get on the plane. And that's obviously changing as it goes forward. And I think the fun part, especially about walking through airports and people watching, is, really looking at how people behave and how people think they might do something, but then how they actually do it. Like, it's always really fascinating to watch people sitting and like the seated behavior of like hoarding of space. So everybody's saying, well, like, even people traveling in groups, they want to sit next to each other. And it's like, yeah, sort of, but they're still like space hoarders, and they're still going to like put their bags all over everything because nobody wants to sit next to anybody because it's an airport and it's a public space and I got to stake my claim. Um, so it's always interesting to watch and just kind of walk through and just see how people behave and what's going on. Um, and then how the furniture kind of blends into that. So like real successful stuff is you can kind of see that, the hoarding doesn't distract from like what's going on versus if it's not as successful and it's just cattle car style, like the hoarding becomes very apparent. Because there's just stuff strewn about. So it's always nice to see like when people kind of think through and say, look, I understand that we have to have 150 seats here, but we really know only 100 of them are going to be used. Maybe we should take the approach of like, let's put 100 in, not kind of, really kind of set an unreasonable expectation. And then that kind of stuff cuts down on what I call the hoarding of space factor in public
Has
spaces.
that changed since March, since the pandemic? I would think that people would hoard even more space.
That's a good question. I have actually not traveled through an airport since March, so I haven't had the luxury of doing people watching. As I talk to different whether airport direct customers, designers, architects, I haven't seen a radical change that I would consider like permanent as we go forward. As far as seating design, I see seed and help kind of people facilitate the short term of xing out seats and trying to use screens and panels and whatever it may be. I think longer term though, especially in some of these like large infrastructure environments, it's really hard to just turn on a dime and start doing something differently. Airport projects get so planned so far out. And
Right.
I think while it's emotionally been a very long time to be dealing with the pandemic, from an infrastructure standpoint, it's a very short period of time. What I think has been interesting is that, in a lot of industries and behaviors, is that the pandemic has probably accelerated trends that we were already on. So online shopping, that was a big trend. Well, that's just accelerated probably by 5 or 10 years of like where it was going to be. So you have that kind of effect from it. So for airports, it's been a trend that not as much beam seating, not as much cattle car feel. We want to create a much more inviting terminal space for passengers to come. People are having to spend more time there, so why not make it pleasurable? Um, and I think as you've seen that shift away from kind of the beam seating, we want to create a more comfortable and inviting experience. So that tends to mean more outlets, more lounge type seating. Um, things geared towards business travelers or family travelers, depending on the airport's kind of makeup. And so division of space has been another big one. And so someone would say, well, that's, important for COVID. Well, we're already on this trend line of like trying to help segment space, again, get away from the hoarding of space as we
Right.
travel. So from what I see, the pandemic is just kind of that trend was already continuing. And that's something we've been able to capitalize on over the last 6-7 years. And I think this just is just accelerating that as people are moving and thinking about projects and thinking about the future. It's not about, well, how do I pack as many seats in here as possible? Because that's how they hadn't really been thinking that way before. We've been moving away from that. It's how do I kind of create the most inviting experience I can with the facility that I have.
And when
And
you
so I
say
think,
beam seating, you're talking about the seats that are next to each other in rows?
yeah. So, you have the kind of rows and rows of, suspended seating that you would typically see in an airport terminal or waiting area or something like that.
Right. So in normal times, how do you study that psychology of seating to see where people are seating and how they're
Mhm.
using the seats?
So we take the observation approach. Um, I've kind of come to that method of design research only because, well, there's challenges whether you do it survey, observation, just statistical data. Um, the hard part is like when it comes to design, and especially when we're designing to be so visceral, that the observation method seems to get us the best results. So when we try like a survey approach or a focus group approach, the challenge is that people are not very self-aware. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're just not very cognizant of behaviors and actions that we take. So, I found in focus groups, especially doing consumer product design, people say one thing and they'll just do another. And that's okay. So to kind of root out some of that, really looking at kind of how people behave in these environments, because they're just sometimes we're not able to communicate our subconscious needs. Um, so we take that observational approach, and a lot of it is just spending time in the environment. There is an element of talking to uh, designers, airport facilities people, airport managers, because while that gives us like what I call like the foundation of the design, there's still all those elements of the inner workings and backgrounds that we're just not going to be privy to, whether that's on a new product that we're designing or whether that is on a specific project. So that's still an integral part of the process. But probably won't, that's not the first start, like where we first start thinking about a product. But as we're kind of going through and we're saying, hey, how do we want to move forward with this? How do we want to understand this feature? How do we want to incorporate that? Then that's where we start to kind of bring in outside feedback and opinions on that.
Really interesting. It's one of those things that I think people take for granted, is where they sit and how airport seating really helps the whole aesthetic of the airport and the feeling and the environment. So
Yeah. Yeah. I get really excited about it. I mean, it's basically like I'm addicted to problem solving, whether it's in design or whatever it is. I'm just kind of a problem solver at heart. I'm a fixer. So no, it's fascinating. I mean, that kind of got me into design. When I was in high school, took a graphic design and 3D design class, and the teacher talked about industrial designers, and I was like, "What is an industrial designer? I don't want to design factories all day. That sounds boring." And he said, it's like, no, industrial designers are like, they design everything. And so it's just like this idea, like everything in our known world had to be designed by somebody. And so everything from like your light switch to the pots and pans to the furniture you sit on to the TV in front of you. I mean, everything's been designed by somebody. Um, from the product world and even the packaging, user interface, it's all designed by somebody. So I find that it's just fascinating to me, and geek out about it.
sounds like Agati's very design focused and comfort focused company.
Yeah, we're just, again, it's just you tend to stick to what you know and what you're excited about. My dad he's definitely from a little bit more artistic background than myself, but again, he's probably, I would put him in the same bucket of addictive problem solver. So he likes to solve problems too. Maybe there's a genetic component to that. I don't know, nature versus nurture on that one. My sister's also the same way. But what I find interesting is that if you're just taking that problem solving mind approach, well, I would not label her as kind of artistic creative. She's very creative in her own right, where she works for a package design company and does analytics. And to hear her talk about how she kind of approaches things and solve problems, it's the same method, just different tools. And she just approaches it in a different way. Where I would start doodling stuff, working on stuff in CAD, making stuff. She'll start getting into a spreadsheet and laying stuff out. But at the end of the day, she's solving a problem. So she gets, I think that's the kind of most excitable part about it.
It's all in the family.
That's right.
Well, thank you. Thank you for spending time with us today with Airport Improvement. We appreciate it. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you in person in 2021.
Yeah. I can't wait to start traveling again.
All right. Well, thanks again, Joe. Agati Furniture, check them out, and we will see you again soon. Thanks for watching.